Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about development and traditions. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, Frederick, what is the traditional development cycle or development process when delivering software? And the short answer is concept, preparation, grooming, implementation, testing and reviewing and things of this nature, and then some type of release, and the optional one would be fixing all the bugs that you just caused. That's usually it. So like about 5, 7, 8-ish steps is usually involved. Now let's be a little bit more in depth on this. So the first thing that usually happens when you're delivering a story of some sort is that it starts out as a concept. So a stakeholder of some type, and a stakeholder is just a person that has a vested interest in the work that the development team does, has a need or a problem or something like that. Let's say for the sake of argument that you have a web shop of some sort and you want to add a feature where you can add campaigns to different products so that you can give a better price to your customers around the holidays, as an example. Now, usually an idea starts out as just that, a kind of rough thought about what you want to do, and then you go into the preparation of this before we go into the grooming phase. Now, the preparation of a story is usually done together with a PO or a project owner of some sort, some manager type of person who is responsible for making sure that they know what the schedule is, like what other work is going on, how important is this in relationship to other things, because trust me when I say this, you can never be fast enough in software development. There's no way to do that, so there's always a million things to do at the same time, and this campaign feature is going to have to be weighed and measured against the current schedule. And if we find that this is important enough and in a good position to be implemented fairly soon, you start talking about the specifics. And the specifics is the most important thing about software development, because everybody has an idea, but there's a world of difference between having an idea and knowing exactly how it's going to work and then building that thing. So that's usually where a manager or a PO comes in. So they start helping the stakeholder figure out kinda the details and like ask some questions and so forth. And then once that is done, what happens is that we go into the grooming phase, and this is where you actually involve the developers and potential designers and other people in the process, right? So what now happens is that ideally the designers, if there are visual elements, should be involved a little bit earlier, because it helps a lot for developers to understand and ask good questions when they kind of have a visual representation, and it also helps a lot with the setting of specifics and like the scoping things when you have a designer that has been involved up front when there are visual elements. But let's just say that we're in the grooming phase. So the grooming phase is just a meeting usually where the developers sit down with the PO and in some cases the stakeholder, usually just the PO. And the PO explains the need and like the expressed problem or so forth that we're solving. So let's say that this campaign feature is the thing that we're talking about. Then the developers are going to start asking questions about, okay, so does it need to support different currencies? Is it for all products, or is it for categories of products? Is it just one product, or can we like create a range? Is there going to be a scheduling feature like that you can schedule that it should go live at a certain time and then fall off, like be removed at a certain threshold? All of these different questions are going to start popping up, and it is the job of the PO to take in all of these different questions and be able, ideally if they've done their job well, they should have asked most of these questions themselves. If they haven't, then we need to have answers to those questions before we can finish up the story. You don't have to have the answer to every single question, but ideally as many as possible, because otherwise you might have to delay this work until you have answers to those questions, or at least structure work so that you don't have to deal with those questions until later on in the development process. but you need answers before you can actually deliver. So let's say that everything is kind of hunky-dory here and everything kind of made sense to all the developers. Then we go into the implementation phase, and then everybody sits at their computer and they hack away at the magical code that they write, right? And then we go into the testing and the reviewing phase. And now usually the developers they usually work in pairs. Like, you can work alone as a developer, but when you have a real software company or a software team, it's usually more than one developer who works together. Now, one of the main reasons for that, apart from capacity and the people can deliver more, is that there is what we call a reviewing process. Now, a reviewing process is just what we call a code review, usually, where one developer goes and looks at the code that another developer wrote and makes sure to try to spot like mistakes and potential issues and things like that. The code becomes generally better. It's very similar to having an author or a writer get a review from somebody else and give some feedback on how they formulate themselves in certain sentences. It's the exact same process, and it's a very important process if you want to keep your quality of software as high as humanly possible. Once that's done and all of the feedback has been taken in and you have maybe iterated a few times on the solution, you go into the actual testing. And this is done in many ways. You might have a dedicated QA or a tester or some person like that, or the developers might do their own testing like together, and like the person who did the reviewing does the testing. You might have the PO do something called acceptance testing, where they just click through the feature and like make sure that everything is up to scratch, right? But it's just a reviewing process. Again, you just make sure that everything is actually working, because software development is actually that hard that you need to usually validate that everything works. Even if you're certain that everything is supposed to be working, you should always test it first. And then you have a deployment or a release of some sort, and that's usually where you simply send out these new features, this campaign feature, out into the running application that is live towards your users. And that basically means that you start up a computer with this new code and people start using that code, and then you pull down the old version of that computer, the old version that runs the old version of the application, and now your campaign feature is up and live and you can use it to your heart's desire. So this is the standard development process for most companies, I would say. So what I want you to take away from this is that the standard or traditional way that you do software development is you get an idea from some person, a stakeholder of some sort. They go and talk to the PO and get some details down so that we can go into the grooming phase, where all the developers and the people who are going to build this thing get to ask their questions so that they can kind of figure out what needs to be done and what details they need to account for. And then they go into implementation, they start working. Then they go into a reviewing process. They make sure that the work that they have is reviewed by somebody else to make sure that everything is up to scratch and has a nice high level of quality. Then you test this code to make sure that everything works as intended. And finally, you ship that code out into an environment that is live towards users. And that is usually how a delivery of a feature of some sort goes. Yeah, that's about it. Have a great day.